All right, welcome back to the Elias Macko Show. It has been over 2 weeks since a terrorist attack in Israel saw the slaughter of at least 1,400 people. We have 200 people or so are still being held hostage by Hamas. And since that time, we have seen in this country many quote-unquote protests, rallies, pro-Palestinian Palestinian rallies in the streets of Canada. It's also happening around the world, by the way. Now, sometimes these protests are being seen as promoting violence, these gatherings that are in support, sometimes people say in support of Hamas, listed terrorist organization. 2 weeks ago in Toronto, we saw demonstrations with participants carrying flags bearing the Hamas emblem. We saw sweets being handed out in celebration 2 weeks ago, even in this city. So let's talk about these demonstrations, these protests. What constitutes free speech? What constitutes threats of violence and worse? Marvin Rotrand is on the line. He's National Director of B'nai Brith Canada. Of course, you know him from his many years at Montreal City Council. Marvin, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Elias, for the time.
Marvin, these, I don't know what you call them. I'll call them rallies or protests, okay? But these protests or rallies that started 2 weeks ago, they began before Israel started any countermeasure. It was the day or the day after that we saw these rallies. Candies were handed out. It was not in response to the Israeli response. It was following the attack. So how do you characterize what we've seen in the country?
Well, you asked the right question at the beginning. There's a very fine line between free speech and hate speech. In France, they basically decided to ban these rallies. Everywhere else, the response in the United States, Canada, Germany, and the UK is they're allowed to proceed, but the police will monitor them. And if there's a violation of the criminal code, in other words, willful promotion of hate, there'll be charges after the fact. Now, all these rallies are very worrisome, mostly because most of them are overtly anti-Semitic. But I'm going to suggest they're noisy but have little public support. But they get a lot of attention. For example, the other day, there was a protest in front of a well-known restaurant in Toronto, Café Landwehr. The participants called for a boycott on the restaurant. Didn't have any Israeli flags, had nothing to do overtly with the conflict going on, but it's Jewish owned, and they wanted to target a Jewish owner. And it was immediately denounced by Mayor Chow in Toronto and just about everyone else. But that didn't stop these people. A couple of days later, they protested in front of the Jewish Community Center, a daycare, to try to intimidate the parents, not because there was overt support of Israel, but because it was Jewish. And we've seen everything from October 10th, the call for an international day of jihad aimed at Jews, which actually caused a couple of fatalities, to many of these marches using genocidal chants, and the destruction of Israel is really the goal. But I don't think, Elias, that's the real story. The real story, there's something quieter and more profound going on in Canada, and that's growing solidarity with Israel. It's the same thing internationally. We're seeing overwhelming sentiment against the Hamas terrorists, and people are signing on to the idea that the solution is they must be eradicated. President Macron of France is in Israel. He was there at least yesterday. I'm not sure about today. But he called for an international coalition to destroy both ISIS and Hamas. And he's not the only international leader to have gone. President Biden was there on Wednesday, and that speaks volumes. Prime Minister Sunak says he will be going very shortly. I would not be surprised if more Western leaders do not show up to clearly indicate their support of Israel and their abhorrence and condemnation of terrorism and Hamas. We haven't ever seen this before, but it isn't just international. In Canada, the legislature is getting involved. Both Ontario and Quebec have adopted unequivocal motions denouncing Hamas and showing their solidarity with Israel. And Premiers Ford, E.B. Smith, Houston, and Moe were all very, very clear in their support. And so was Premier Legault here in Quebec. The flags were flown at half-mast on the National Assembly. There's been strong statements, and it's gone down to the municipal level.
So, Marvin, just to what you're saying, because I've seen the polling that shows what you're talking about. The support among the public is very much in Israel's favor, but the youngest demographic 18 to 29, for some reason, it's a jump ball, right? They don't. It is not an open and shut case like we see in other demographics. So, what do you think's happening there? Why are young people, and we see it on university campuses? What is the difference with young people and how they view this conflict very differently?
Well, we've had a decade of online hate, misinformation, disinformation. The government of Ontario did a survey discovering a third of graduates, their high schools didn't believe the Holocaust happened. There's been so much vilification of Israel. Information is propaganda in war. We saw, Elias, the case last week where Hamas claimed that Israel had bombed the hospital. It turned out to be an errant rocket actually aimed at Israeli civilians that crashed in the parking lot of the hospital. Hospital is still standing. The number of casualties is unfortunate, but far less than what was said by Hamas. But however, many media, including the New York Times, just picked it up as if it was gospel truth. The Times is now giving its mea culpa. And, we have to be careful when we look at all this stuff. There's the necessity of education. I think we've neglected to look at, the conflict in the Middle East and tell the story to our young people. On campus, there is a lot of hate aimed at Israel, but universities this time are reacting in a way we haven't seen before. York is threatening the dissolution of its student societies because of their hateful statements. Queens, we had an incident the other day when mezuzahs were torn off the doors of Jewish students and residents. The university is reacting forcefully. But so are municipalities. The mayor of Barrie personally called me to say he lit up the municipal buildings in blue and white for Israel. The mayor of Sault Ste. Marie wrote to me and said, hey, we've raised the Israeli flag and we've made City Hall white and blue for Israel. In Prince George, BC, of all places, the councillors joined the community for a vigil for Israel, and about 100 people showed up.
So
in the Yukon,
can I just you're going down the list here, Marvin. I've seen those stories, but we haven't talked about the top. Okay, so let me read you a quote here from the Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak. Okay, here's what he wrote yesterday. About similar incidents in his country, right? In the United Kingdom, in London, we are seeing incidents, hate speech, violent speech on streets. Here's what he wrote. This weekend, we saw hate on our streets. Calls for jihad are not only a threat to the Jewish community, but to our democratic values. We will never tolerate anti-Semitism in our country, and we expect the police to take all necessary action to tackle extremism head on. You went down a list of political leaders. You mentioned no one from the top of this country. Should we be seeing this same type of language from Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau?
We have, and I'm going to encourage even more. Prime Minister Trudeau a week ago said in Parliament, Hamas are not...
Oh, Marvin?
They are
Marvin, you broke up there for a second, Marvin.
His words said, Prime Minister Trudeau quite clearly said in Parliament a week ago that Hamas are not freedom fighters, are not a resistance, they are terrorists. And his words have been echoed by opposition leader Pierre Poilievre and third-party leader Jagmeet Singh. More is better, but we are already getting the type of support to call this out from the highest levels of the government of Canada. That's not the problem. The problem is to ensure the public says quite clearly these people who are making anti-Semitic statements and chants at these marches, we're not with you. We are with Israel. That's the important thing.
I just want to wrap up here, Marvin, with that line. What are the things that you have seen on Montreal streets for our audience? What are the things that you have seen that you feel have crossed the line and perhaps require a more serious approach from leaders and perhaps police?
Well, we had a webinar held by our regional manager, Hank Topaz, yesterday with his chief, Doug Air. And he said it's very simple to see Hamas or Hezbollah flags in Montreal, but it's not technically illegal. It depends if they're used against individuals or something. It's worrisome, and so are chants that call for the destruction of Israel. And so are the targeting of individual Jewish businesses and individuals. Unacceptable. Unfortunately, as I said at the beginning, the line between free speech and hate speech is very, very fine. And, clearly the police are monitoring this, and there may be charges against individuals, but that may come far in the future. after this is all over. In the meantime, we have to build an international coalition that will ensure that the peace process will be relaunched, and it will be relaunched without the terrorists of Hamas holding sway over the Palestinian people.
You went through the list of world leaders that have been to Israel over the last week or so. I'll throw in Italy, by the way. A prime minister there visited the country as well. We saw the chancellor of Germany visit the country. Just last, when you talk about what you just mentioned, coalition here, where's Canada standing, and where should Canada stand in leadership, world leadership on this issue?
Well, if you're asking me whether we feel it would be important for Prime Minister Trudeau to go to Israel, indeed, we would. He's been to Ukraine, as have all the other leaders. I think the Western world sees support of Israel in the same way that it sees support for Ukraine. We are engaged in a struggle against extremism, terrorism, and authoritarianism. Our way of life is actually threatened, and our leaders have stepped up to the plate. I appreciate all the statements, and Canada has done the right thing. I think Foreign Minister Melanie Joly has been more than clear, but should the Prime Minister go to Israel? If you ask me, it's an unequivocal yes.
Marvin, we have to leave it there. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you, and have a good day.
Marvin Rotrand is National Director of B'nai Brith Canada.